I've got to be honest with you, despite loving platform games, I only really play the easy ones. I've never honed my skills with games like Ninja Gaiden or Mega Man, so I think it's time now to master the genre which I love so much in video games. Well, I say master, I know it's more like just play them for 5 minutes, get angry and rage on Twitter for a bit.
Shovel Knight, developed by Yacht Club Games, isn't just an imitator of classic platform titles, instead it absolutely is a classic platformer, and it illustrates perfectly why these games were all the rage in the late 80s and early 90s. It's hard to pinpoint which game this embodies the most. I mean, its level themes, power-ups and the villages are inspired by Castlevania, whereas the bosses, narrative and character upgrades can easily be compared to Mega Man, and let's not forget the knockback, stiff controls and instant death pits of pretty much every platform game ever made. And much like every platformer ever, the story has the brave hero going after the main villain, while also thwarting her minions and lieutenants. In this case, our main baddie is the Enchantress, who has kidnapped Shield Knight and has corrupted the other knights into doing her bidding. This is where the Mega Man-esque elements come into play, where each stage belongs to its respective knight and at the end there'll always be a boss. What I like about this is that the designs for each level change both aesthetically and in colour scheme, while also having its own hallmarks to separate every stage from each other. It's the level design that makes the game what it is, as every knight's lair has its tricks and traps to stop you. For example, Plague Knight's Explodatorium has the most explosive traps and kamikaze enemies, which is a stark contrast to Treasure Knight's flooded submarine. The stages and their inhabitants don't just harm Shovel Knight, but can hinder the player in terms of speed if they don't adapt to its gimmicks and features. Few levels star the same enemies or ways of slowing down the player, meaning that you constantly have to change your tactics each time you face off against the stage's boss and its minions. However, you can expect to see recycled inhabitants like flying rats, beetles, wizards with projectiles, and enemies with the same functions and a different skin. This doesn't have to be a bad thing though, as whenever I come across these enemies I know how to beat them without taking a few seconds to work out their strategy. And that's a key part with Shovel Knight, the strategy. In this game you'll be expected to stop and start to tackle foes and avoid their projectiles, or maybe sit and wait for a moving platform to get in position for you to work with. And it's this that made the game pretty boring at times, at least when I wasn't tense after dying repeatedly. Having to wait for enemies to fire off projectiles or get in range of your shovel, which by the way can't be used while moving, takes up a load of time, perhaps more than acceptable in some cases. But my favourite kind of strategy in Shovel Knight isn't just knowing and attacking enemies, but when to use my power-ups. By purchasing them from one of the game's vendors in hidden areas of the level, or in the villages dotted around the map, you can use these to navigate the levels in unique and interesting ways, as well as beat enemies and bosses easily. I'd go as far as to say that the power-ups are my favourite thing about the game, as our Scion Crusader starts off pretty ill-equipped. While his attack does the job, it's a pain to use on flying enemies which need to be lined up perfectly to hit them, and unlike most items when attacking I stay on the spot to swipe foes with my shovel. One should reserve their power-ups for the most dangerous, or rewarding, of times though, as they use a resource called magic. Not very original I know, but magic is quickly expended and the different items use different amounts, so that you're careful about what situation your abilities are used in. Not to mention there'll be times when you can't use certain ones anyway. You won't be able to use your fire wand if an enemy has a shield, and your propeller ability will replace your giant fist when getting over large chasms. These were the only times where I like to pause the gameplay to change something up, as I don't like my running and jumping to be interrupted by, well, you know, the running and jumping, as I said earlier. Speaking of which, Shovel Knight is a fine platform character, if a bit clunky in places. His attacks are few, involving only a swipe and a downward thrust of his weapon, but in the second village one can purchase abilities which make his attacks and his armour more robust. One of the neat things about the character is that his shovel can be used to, well, shovel up piles of dirt, charcoal and even chip out ore from the ground. It's such attention to detail which goes a long way. Its controls are somewhat stiff, and because of this, Polar Knights level was my favourite, as I got to slip and slide around on the ice and feel more in control. Because I'm not used to such a heavy character, though I should be with all the bad platformers I've played, it took me a while to get used to his jumps.
It's been a while since I've done this, but while playing Shovel Knight I couldn't help but feel as though pressing down the jump button harder would make him travel further. Needless to say, it doesn't.
My favourite thing about the character has to be his dialogue with the people he comes across. He's a noble character with a serious attitude to the tasks he's been given, but this is a stark contrast to the silly and vibrant characters occupying his world, making the conversations even funnier. But the humour ends when the boss battles get serious and developers know how to extend the trial and error even more. I know that the first time on these bosses I'll die, so I use my first go on them to learn the tactics and in what order their moves are performed. Then, just to screw them, I use the invulnerability item to keep the loot out of them. Oh yeah, the loot. One of the great things about Shovel Knight is that it doesn't have a lives or score system, rather when you die you lose a portion of the treasure you've currently got on hand, and the more you have, the more you'll lose when you inevitably die in some crushingly humiliating way. Because of this continue system, you're not just playing for the sake of it because you want to get back that hard-earned treasure. If you reach the place you died at, you can still recover the floating bags of loot, provided of course that they're in reach. But if you die again, that loot is lost and the cycle begins anew. And trust me, you need gold to get anywhere in this game. Purchasing meal tickets to expand your health meter, increasing your mana pool, buying items and gambling are all necessary to progress through the game, especially if you're as bad as myself.
So that's the gameplay covered, it's time now to move on to the visuals and soundtrack.
Shovel Knight is one of the best looking games I've ever seen, and there's all kinds of reasons why I appreciate the art design. For starters, it understands the visual quality of the games it's inspired by. The sprites and backgrounds are finely detailed as opposed to the different coloured blobs like in a fair few pixel art games. The talent of the artist really shows with the lighting effects and how everything shines appropriately. Add to that the nostalgic animation work, which looks excellent regardless of the frame rate.
I should just point out that in regards to pixel art, I can't do any better, but this is the only game that's done it in the style that I like it. And Minecraft to a very certain degree. There's very few games that can pull it off without looking samey.
However, the music isn't really all that great, at least for the most part. What I can say though is that everything sounds like it was made for an NES, and once again it's made only more authentic by not trying to improve on the classic music of 90s platformers.
It's time to dig up my final thoughts before we bury this review. Wait, with all the shovel talk, I'm surprised Undertaker hasn't appeared on the show yet. I said I'm surprised Undertaker hasn't appeared on the show yet! I'll be right back.
Considering what gameplay you've seen and what I've talked about, I don't think there's much left to say. Shovel Knight's really just a load of old platform games that have been clustered together before forming into one. It's a solid platformer despite being unfair at times with knockback and controls, and once you bought everything in the game, there's little reason to play better in later stages. Not that it really matters, as if you're good you can probably complete the game in 6 hours, whereas those less skilled may take 12 to 16 hours to finish it. Shovel Knight is full of trial, error and frustration, but it never gets to the point where you'll stop playing. You'll always know what you did wrong and how to counter it, and even if it means taking a break before you get around to doing so. For only £10.99 it's a steal, and has a high amount of replay value for the sadomasochist in all of us.
That's all for me, folks, so until the next time, I am the Undertaker, and if you'd excuse me, I'm going to bury some heads in the sand. Ta-ta for now.